and welcome back. So this is continuing my assessment or analysis of the wasteland. I'm looking at the second part here called The Game of Chess, which is a reference to Thomas Middleton, the English dramatist who wrote the play Women Beware Women, where a game of chess is very important, and he also wrote another play called The Game of Chess, so it's definitely a reference to Middleton. I advise anyone watching this to listen to the poem in the version below, read by Tom O Bedlam, the section rather, A Game of Chess, read by Tom O Bedlam. In fact, as I do these videos section by section, I will always put up a reading by Tom O Bedlam of that section, so you should really listen to that alongside this video or before this video, and this hopefully will then make more sense. So a game of chess becomes personal. So the burial of the dead was very, very public. It's something that is communal. You can say something about things that everybody shares. The misery of life in the modern wasteland. All the people going around like dead men and women, and the major themes of the poem laid out. Here, the focus is narrowed onto personal relationships. So we've heard about what life is generally like in the modern wasteland. How is it in terms of the way individuals relate to each other, particularly in personal relationships? So we have two relationships which I've talked about here. One is upper middle class and the other is working class. Eliot obviously knew more about the first than the second, and it's clear that the first section of A Game of Chess is better really than the second, I think. Although the second is not bad, and he doesn't do a bad job talking about something which he probably had very little experience of. The first section is much more memorable, and it begins with a young woman surrounded by perfumes and lotions and potions intended to make her look more beautiful, intended to hide defects. One is again reminded of John Webster and the Duchess of Malfi, where it's said at one point that, or at many points actually, it's talked about the way in which women hide their defects under makeup, and also in Shakespeare it's pretty common as well. Get thee to my lady's chamber and tell her that if she paint an inch thick she will come to this favour, or something like that in Hamlet. So actually this section takes as its main inspiration poem by Alexander Pope, The Rape of the Lock, which is a comic epic poem where someone steals a lock of hair from the lady Belinda, and there's one section of the poem where Belinda is surrounded by her potions of beauty, and it's very light-hearted really most of the time, and nothing like Eliot's poem, but obviously Belinda is the person that he has most in mind, and Alexander Pope, in creating this scene of the lady surrounded by her beautifying potions and lotions. Of course, it's not Belinda, and one might consider the possibility that there's a lot of autobiography in this section, because Eliot was married to someone who was later confined to a lunatic asylum. I don't know if it was done rightly or unjustly, but anyway, she obviously had some mental issues, and this section is really about a woman who is a bit, well, in common parlance we would say she seems neurotic, but perhaps people could rightly say that her unresponsive husband has driven her to the edge of insanity, and maybe that's true. Neither are portrayed in a favourable way. The woman is portrayed as being on the edge of insanity, you can say, or certainly strongly neurotic, and the man unresponsive, unhelpful, and even little passive aggressive, perhaps. So the section begins with the famous line about the chair she sat in like a burnished throne, so referencing Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra, and the line, the barge she sat in like a burnished throne, so referencing Cleopatra here. But as so often in Eliot, it's ironic. The woman is really nothing like Cleopatra. When Cleopatra was faced with insurmountable difficulties, she killed herself with the asp, but this lady is not likely to do that. We see that she seems self-obsessed, of course, as such people are most of the time, and looking outwards to other people to try and solve problems, which might seem reasonable, as she expects support from her husband, but you can say that, but that's not what the emphasis is on in this section of the poem. The emphasis is on her own volatility, the fact that she's seeing things, hearing things, needs support from other people, because she seems mentally and emotionally very, very weak and unstable. And the man, perhaps it's suggested, has been through some kind of trauma. He seems to be unable to express himself, except in rather obscure literary ways. And it is interesting to know that Eliot was married to someone, Vivian, who actually did end up in an asylum, and there are suggestions later that perhaps he felt some guilt for what he felt was his lack of responsiveness to Vivian, his inability to help her. So maybe there is some element of autobiography here. It would not be surprising. The class is right, the age is right, the place is right, the things they do is right. So maybe it's a glimpse of Eliot's own personal life at its worst. So the man comes up the stairs and interrupts a woman at a toilet, as we can say, and this conversation begins between them. The first part is in blank verse, which is very ornate and reminiscent of Pope, although Pope doesn't use blank verse, but I mean it's very grand, and it's in the grand mode, we can say, the mode of grandeur, and then it changes with this conversation. So he comes up, and the two of them start talking, and she is complaining about noises. What's the wind doing? And the man says, "Oh, nothing. It's not doing anything. What was that noise? I heard it again. Oh, again. It's nothing. And then the woman starts to get irritated. Do you know nothing? Do you see nothing? Do you remember nothing? And the man, it seems that the lady asks a question and the man doesn't say anything, but replies something in his own mind. Some of his answers are extremely obscure. Something like one of them is, "I think we are in Rat's Alley, where the dead men lost their bones." Could be a reference to the First World War, the trenches in the First World War. Is he someone who has been traumatized in the First World War, so he finds it difficult to speak or express emotions? Could be. That certainly wouldn't be Eliot. As always, there are probably elements of autobiography and elements of things that are created here. She also asks him what's in his head, and it seems that he replies, she. It's often said that his reply is about the Shakespearean rag, but it seems to me that it's actually the lady saying, "Is there nothing in your head? But oh, that Shakespearean rag, it's so elegant, so intelligent." Maybe this is her way of kind of downgrading his intellectual activities. He's always thinking about intellectual things. He's never thinking about her. She reduces it all to a 1912 rag called the Shakespeare rag. So it's a very unsatisfying, very difficult is not the right word. It's a relationship that seems doomed to failure. It's already failed, really, but they're going through the motions. And at the end of the section, the woman asks the man in a despairing tone, "What shall we do? What shall we ever do?" Then the man, in his rather strange calmness to himself, says, "The hot water at 10, and if it rains, a closed car at 4, and we shall play a game of chess, pressing lidless eyes and waiting for a knock upon the door." So the idea of lidless eyes gives the idea of someone who can't rest, no sleep, someone who is always awake, stuck in their misery. And these two can give no satisfaction to each other, so they're just waiting for an interruption, waiting for someone to take them out of their self-imposed misery, give them something else to think about, give them something else to do. So it's a vision of hell in a relationship. Basically, two people who totally misunderstand each other, totally can't understand each other, and just keep going through the motions of having a life together. The second of the two views of relationships in this wasteland is of a working class group of people who are in a pub in the East End of London, and they're talking about a relationship between a woman called Lil and her husband Albert. Now they've had 5 children, and now she's taking abortion pills to stop having any more, and it's made her look very old and aged, and they're worried that she's looking old before her time, and they say, "Well, what did you get married for if you didn't want to have? What did she get married for if she didn't want to have children?" The woman talking says, "That's what I said. That's what I said to her." So it seems that there is similarity between this relationship and the earlier one. They're different classes of people, but the despair and the uselessness of it all is still there. This is another pointless relationship. Two people who are just together for no particular reason except to have children, and they just keep on breeding like rabbits, and they've reached a point now where there's not even the reason of having children because they already have more mouths than they can feed. So it's another vision of one more useless relationship in the wasteland. So wherever you look, on a personal level, we see unsatisfying relationships. At the end, there is a reference to Hamlet with Ophelia's words as she goes up the last time. Good night, sweet ladies. Good night, good night, good night. And the barman is coming around saying, hurry up please, it's time. He wants everyone to leave, and all the members of the group all say good night to each other. So good night Lou, good night. And it finishes with this reference to Ophelia in Hamlet. So the first lady is related to Cleopatra, the chair she sat in like a burnished throne, and the second one is related to Ophelia. So it's worth noting that both those literary ladies took the way out of suicide. You feel that suicide probably doesn't take place in this wasteland. It's just kind of fading away from hopelessness and despair. So I would say that this section is really a narrowing of the focus from the general identity of the wasteland in the burial of the dead to something more specific in terms of the personal relationships that are possible or impossible in this wasteland. So they're my ideas on this section. I don't think I have anything more to say really. And next time I'll look at the fire sermon, which is reference to the third sermon of the Buddha after he became enlightened. And in fact, it is worth saying before I go that relating this to what I said earlier in the burial of the dead, you could see these two relationships as relationships lost in samsara, two lost in the realm of cause and effect, conditioning, and in terms of Buddhism, personal relationships where you think that one person can fulfill the other or complete the other can never finally be satisfying. So it could be Eliot continuing his analogy with Buddhism, if that is there, as I suggested it could be in the burial of the dead. So just as everything in samsara is unsatisfying and dukkha, suffering, so personal relationships, one thinks they might give some meaning to the samsaric reality, but they never can. They just partake of the suffering and give rise to new suffering, because people make the mistake of thinking that they can only be completed by reference in terms of another person, but actually they can only find happiness within themselves and by moving beyond samsara. So anyway, that's for next time, the fire sermon, the reference to the Buddha Dhamma. So I hope that was useful, and see you next time. Thanks.